Very good. Ready. I think almost Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. We can kick this off. We may have some stragglers. But welcome everyone to the annual Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission orientation. I have a few comments to make before we launch in. However, I wanted to turn it over first to Kyle, who will sort of talk about the ground rules for this Zoom meeting.
Sure, thank you very much. My name's Kyle Kobe, and I'll be facilitating Zoom video portion of the meeting. Joining me here in the City Commission room is Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. We'll work alongside the Vice Chair, who's on remote video, to facilitate the meeting proceedings. The meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel, Public Access Cable Channel 25. During the meeting, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found in the lower left-hand corner of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you are muted, a red line will appear over the icon. This will make it easier for everyone to hear the meeting. Just remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. In the menu, you can also turn your camera on or off by clicking the video icon located next to the microphone icon. If you are participating by phone, you can enter *6 to mute and unmute your phone. Somewhere on your Zoom screen, you will also see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker. Gallery view tiles all the meeting participants. Commissioners, you must state your name and title each time you speak. Members of city staff must also state their name and title each time they speak. I want to again remind everybody to please mute yourself when you're not speaking. I'll now turn the meeting over to Becky Pepper, Planning Manager.
Good morning, Becky Pepper with the Planning Development Services Department. Before we begin our first session this morning, I just wanted to say welcome and thank you for attending our virtual Planning Commission orientation this year. For those of you that haven't seen it, I wanted to let you know that the agenda has been posted on our city website, so you can find that there. You'll also find a packet of materials there, and many of those materials are really something that you can read at your convenience after the meeting. But I did want to let you know that a few of those materials at the beginning of the packet will be relevant to our first session with Randy Larkin. And we've also added a new item of reference for you that's information about our applications and our notice requirements. So you can find that in that packet. So we have 3 sessions for you today. In that first session, as I mentioned, we'll hear from Randy Larkin. And then our last session, we'll have members of the City and Planning Commissioners joining us. So we are looking forward to a full morning with some great discussion. So again, welcome. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Vice Chair Sinclair. Thank you.
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. Thank you, Becky. I just had a couple comments to make before Randy launches in. Last time we did this, I think, was fall 2019. And at that time, we were sort of in the comfortable confines of the county's beautiful public works building. There was candy on the desks and coffee, bagels, and all the trappings. There was a good lunch. We had physical proximity and good conversation, and the spontaneous laughter that comes with that, and a full day's agenda. Today is obviously different. We have a half day. We're separate. We have to provide our own coffee and snacks. We're on Zoom. And I think by virtue of some of these things, there's a risk that the next 3 hours could be disappointing or dissatisfying to some. When we're on a recorded Zoom call, I think people can be disinclined to engage in frank and open discussions. But I just wanted to say at the outset, I think it's still right to do this, even in a modified format. We need the orientation. We obviously need COMA, core refresher. But perhaps, I think more importantly, I think we just need time together outside of our regular meetings. We can't forsake opportunities to explore, reflect on who we are as commissioners, who we are as a commission, a body. I guess the faith placed in us and expectations of us by those we were appointed by. And how we can be better. So I just want to acknowledge at the outset here, this is obviously not ideal, but what we go over today, I think will help at least scratch the surface, hopefully maybe a little deeper than that, of some of the things that I just talked about. I trust everyone will give it a chance and commit to participating, to sharing, questioning, being vulnerable, perhaps, And then let's just see if we can learn something in the meantime. And one last thing for the second session on the philosophy of the Planning Commission, while over the next hour or so, I would just ask you to consider and keep in mind examples that you have of decisions or actions, conversations, outcomes in the context of the Planning Commission that you think were notable or surprising or educational, hard, easy, disappointing, etc., and why that's the case. And I think those sorts of ideas will help push that conversation that Eric will be helping us with. So I guess with that, those comments, thanks for being here, and I just want to turn it over to Randy.
Good morning, Commissioners. Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney, and I'm here to give a refresher on the Open Meetings Act, conflicts of interest, and answer any general questions you have. For those that have been here before, it'll be a refresher. For those that are new, and maybe some of this will be new. Among all the, attorney I get to this is there. Hardly anything beats this maybe, but at the same time, it is extremely important to keep you out of trouble, keep the city out of trouble. And because of the nature of it, if you have any questions or comments as we go along, please feel free to interject at any time. Keep this interactive. It keeps it flowing a little bit better, a little bit easier. Becky, I believe, is going to help me, or Kyle, or somebody's going to help me with the PowerPoint. I actually have stepped into the 20th century anyway regarding technology. And so we'll have a little bit of something to look at other than me on the screen, which I think is a benefit to all of us. All right. With that said, we'll jump into the Open Meetings Act. The Open Meetings Act was enacted by the Kansas legislature in 1972. It came out of a waiver reform that was, coming out of the 1960s relating to making sure that governments performed in the public, that is taken out of the smoke-filled back rooms where it had been performed previously. Kansas was kind of ahead of the curve in 1972 with the Open Meetings Act, a little bit behind the curve with the Open Records Act of 1984. Those are all kind of related, but I think Kansas was in the top, one of the earlier 1/3 of the states to have an Open Meetings Act. In any event, the Open Meetings Act has been described as the cornerstone of public access to local and state government. Its fundamental purpose is to require local and state government to conduct the business of the public in the public. A representative government is dependent on informed electorate, and that's the policy that underlies the Open Meetings Act. Courts construe the Open Meetings Act liberally and its exceptions narrowly in order to effectuate that policy. And what that means is basically is if it's a close question, it's going to go against the government. So we err on the side of caution when it comes to open meetings. This is not something that we take lightly, and neither does the state. All right, next slide. All right, there are two basically threshold criteria that must exist before the Open Meeting Act applies. First, there has to be a covered entity, or the body that's involved has to be a covered entity, and there has to be a meeting, as that term is defined in the Act. Next slide. Bodies subject to the Act, basically it applies to all legislative and administrative bodies, state agencies, and political subdivisions and taxing subdivisions of the state. That includes the city of Lawrence, and that includes Douglas County. Both are covered entities. Also covered within that are bodies that are supported by public funds. Finally, subordinate agencies of political subdivisions, such as the city or the county, are also covered. For the purposes of the Open Meetings Act, the Planning Commission is a covered entity. So that's basically cut and dried. But the meat of the matter that comes down to it, and where the questions almost always reside regarding Open Meetings Act, is whether or not there's been a meeting. And so we'll go to the next slide. A meeting occurs when there are three things present. It has to be all three. has to be a gathering or assembly in person or through the use of telephone or any medium for interactive communications by a majority of a membership of the body for the purposes of discussing the business of the Planning Commission. So three things. There has to be by a majority to discuss the business of the body. Once those three things happen, there's a meeting, and the Open Meetings Act will apply to the meeting, to the discussion. Next slide. Start with the interactive communication part of it. And that clearly applies when you have a meeting in the City Hall. But it also includes telephone calls, conference calls, video calls, work sessions, video conferences, online communications, chat rooms. Would also apply to Zoom meetings, such as what we're doing here. All those are covered as interactive communications where you can exchange ideas across a medium. Next slide. Majority of the membership, we have 10 members that are on the Planning Commission, so a majority of the membership is 6. So we have a quorum, we have a meeting, that's obviously covered by COMA, but if we're, for example, today we're in a Zoom meeting, we're covered by COMA today, we have the requisite number. If it's 4, 3, it's not covered, but if 6 of you are involved in a chat room, the Open Meetings Act very well may apply. Next slide. And then discussing the business of the body. Basically, it isn't triggered by finding action or taking action or voting or any of that things. It's basically, you discuss anything that's business before the board. So if you have big zoning application coming up by an entity, and that would be the business of the board, or a special use permit, or something that you would have to decide in the usual course of what you do as the Planning Commission, then that is within the business of the body. Social gatherings, you know, I think in the past, the Planning Commission has held a couple social gatherings. As long as there's no discussion of the business, that's okay. Also okay is attending seminars, and I believe that in the past, commissioners have attended out-of-state seminars to discuss planning issues. Those are all fine, just as long as there is no discussion of the specific business of the body at that time. All right, next slide. Also, going back to the communications, electronic communications, one thing that everyone needs to be aware of is using social media. That's caused some issues lately. Typically, electronic communications like emails are okay. However, you need to be aware that if you use emails, make sure you only send it to one other commissioner or to the planning director, because you hit reply all of a sudden you've implicated everybody on the Planning Commission, and perhaps may create a COMA issue just by hitting reply all. So just be aware of the reply all. Next slide. Another thing to be aware of is there was just a recent case involving a city down south, actually out west. And what they were doing was they were discussing appointments to a board. This was the city government. They were discussing appointments to a board on the municipal hospital. And they were using social media and posting basically simultaneously all on Facebook. And the Kansas Attorney General found that to be basically that they were conducting business through interactive media over social media. So be aware when you use Facebook, Twitter, those types of things, when you discuss, basically official business of the board. Be very wary of doing that. You can't, just be very wary and be aware that it could lead to problems. All right, next slide. All right, I think we can slide on to the next one. And here we are, emails again. We talked about that already. Next slide. Another thing to be very wary of when you use emails or interactive communications or social media is serial meetings. Basically, a serial meeting occurs when it collectively involves a majority of the membership of the body, as we discussed, that's 6. And there's a common topic of discussion concerning business or affairs of the body. And it's intended by people involved in the communications to reach an agreement or to make a decision on a matter that will be binding before the body or agency. And typically how this happens, and what happened down south, I think it was a community outside of Wichita that got into trouble for this. The mayor sent an email to one of the commissioners saying, this is how Bob's going to vote, and I'm going to vote in favor of it too. They sent another email to another commissioner, and then they basically were taking actions through a chain of emails. Kansas Attorney General found that to be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. So be very wary of communicating what another commissioner has said to you in an email. If you're communicating with another commissioner, all it take would be 6 of you to lead to an Open Meetings Act. So serial meetings are something that we want to avoid. All right, next slide. So again, this is just a review. The 3 important things is when determining whether there's a meeting, there has to be some type of interactive communication through any type of media. Has to involve a majority of the membership of the body, which we discussed as 6, and it has to be the business of the body. Now, one thing that we've talked about in the past regarding this is it's probably okay to talk about things that have occurred in the past, but I'm not so sure about that now based on that new case, because they were talking about somebody that they had appointed already to the hospital board as being in the business. Now, there's possible to draw the distinction that they were talking about something because they're also going to be making appointments in the future. And so that may have been the triggering cause for them to get in trouble for things that, they had done already. But at the same time, be a little bit leery about discussing, a decision that you may have made. I think you probably be okay, but, there are times, we have a site plan or a rezoning come before you, and then it comes before you again on a special use permit or some other type of deal. And we don't want to lead to a situation where we get in trouble talking about something you've done already under the guise that it's no longer the business of the body because it's already been decided. So that's just something to be aware of as we go forward. All right, next slide. Common requirements are basically that all meetings must be open to the public and proper notice has been given. It's a little trickier these days without actually being able to meet in person and because of social distancing. And so we have these Zoom meetings, and thankfully the Attorney General has given direction as to how we handle these, and so that we can meet all the COMA requirements. Must be held in places accessible to the general public, which is a little bit tricky for those, if we're holding meetings like this over Zoom, that everybody has access, which is why we have City Hall open so that people could come in and actually watch these meetings on television. If they don't have access, we make them available. People can listen by telephone, may not be able to actually participate, but they can listen to it. So those are some of the challenges that we had when we moved to Zoom meetings. Like I said, they have to be conducted so that the public can observe or at least listen to the proceedings. So, we're not making decisions in the dark, in hiding, in secret. All right, next slide. They have to give notice. I think we have, the secretary usually does this. This isn't the board's duty, but we have to give notice of the time frame, and we must provide notice to people who request it. Next slide. Agenda. Open Meetings Act does not require that agendas be made, but if an agenda is made, like we typically make agendas for the Planning Commission, it should be followed. Now, the board has the right and has the discretion to move things around, to defer items, to move an item to another time period, do those types of deals. One thing that has to be done, that the only requirement regarding agendas is that if you do make an agenda and people request one, you have to make it available to them, either electronically or a hard copy or somehow so they have access and can see what's on the agenda. All right, next slide, please. All right, now we'll get into the nitty and the gritty, which is the enforcement portion of Open Meetings Act and what can actually happen. Any person aggrieved by an action of the Planning Commission is empowered to bring a private cause of action. They can sue in their own name. The district attorney, you can leave, but go back to the start of the other one. Sorry, this is a different thing. So I don't have any slides on the penalties portion. The district attorney and attorney general can bring actions on the name of the state against the Planning Commission. And if an action is brought for enforcement of the Open Meetings Act, it will take precedence over other things that the court has. That's how serious the state takes these actions. A judge will move things from its calendar to hear this as soon as possible. I assume there would probably be some criminal situation may take precedence, but over any type of other civil action, this will take precedence. And the other thing is that the city or the Planning Commission or whomever is defending the action will actually have the burden of proof. The burden of proof is not on the party bringing the action. The burden of proof is on the party who's been challenged. So it would be our burden to establish by a preponderance of the evidence that we comply with the Open Meetings Act. So that's a complete flip of general civil law in the state. So that's just to give you an idea how serious the state takes these. The penalties that are available under OCOMA is that any action that has been taken by the Planning Commission may be voidable. That means the court can just basically erase what's been done. Civil penalty for up to $500 for each violation may be assessed against individual members of the body. So, it happens a couple times that $500 civil penalty. This is not it's strict intention law. It's a knowingly law. So you don't have to intend to break the law to be convicted. All you have to do is know what it is that you're doing when you do it. Did you knowledgeably involve yourself in this conversation? And that's all it would take. The court can enter injunctions, mandamus. They can void the decision. They can send it back. Those are all types of things that the court can do. And also the costs can be assessed against you. I don't believe that would involve attorney's fees, but the cost of bringing the action. And if there's any costs related to perhaps depositions or anything necessary to establish the case, those can also be assessed against individuals. And with that, that's the Open Meetings Act. So does anybody have any questions regarding that or how we do things or anything as we go forward? All right, very good. We'll slide directly into the conflicts of interest. This comes up quite a bit. I'd say probably a half dozen to a dozen times a year regarding questions whether I should abstain or not abstain. The conflict of interest law comes out of the same wave of reform activities of the 60s, 50s, 60s. It was enacted in 1973. And basically, the purpose of the Kansas conflict of interest laws is to make sure that people do not use public office for private gain. You can't capitalize on serving the public to your own personal needs or gains. The next slide. Basically, what it is you cannot act on anything wherein you have a substantial interest. And basically, the act says that a commissioner cannot act on any business in which he or she has a substantial interest. And basically, what is a substantial interest? A substantial interest is listed in the Kansas statutes, and there's 5 of them. If an individual or an individual spouse, either individually or collectively, has owned within 12 months a legal or equitable interest exceeding $5,000 or 5% of any business, whichever is less, then the commissioner has a substantial interest in that entity. So if there's a local business and you own stock in it and own more than 5% of it, you have a substantial interest in that business. If you contributed $5,000 or own more than $5,000, even if it doesn't rise to 5% of any business, you have a substantial interest in that entity going forward. And you cannot, unless, as we talk later, you either file a statement of substantial interest or you abstain, take any action regarding that entity. All right, the next slide. If you or your spouse has received taxable income of more than $2,000 from anybody in the previous calendar year, then you have substantial interest in that company. So if you work for a business in town and they're seeking a situation where they're getting a rezoning or something of that nature, you have a substantial interest. I remember when Patrick Kelly was working for the school district had a lot of items that come before the planning commission. So he had a situation where he had to either disclose that substantial interest or abstain from those types of matters involving his employer because he received more than $2,000 from them in the previous years. All right, next thing. If your individual or your spouse receives goods or anything of more than $500 from a business or combination of businesses in the past year, then you have a substantial interest. So, for example, if you win a shopping spree at Hy-Vee that exceeds $500, you now have a substantial interest in Hy-Vee for the next year for $500. If you ran for public office, someone contributed $500 to you or more, perhaps you have a substantial interest in that business or that person or anything that they have. So be aware of that. The next slide. If you hold any position of officer, director, or partner, associate of any business other than a not-for-profit organization that are listed under one of those specific sub-chapters, then you have a substantial interest in that body, whether or not you receive any compensation from that body. So, I mean, things like if you sit on the board of the Boys and Girls Club and they come before the Planning Commission, which they have in the past, I think they fall under one of these tax exemptions and you'll be okay. But if you sit on the board of a company or any other type of entity that it comes before the Planning Commission, be very careful. You might very well have a substantial interest in any of that entities that appears before the Planning Commission. All right, next slide. If you receive any type of commission that exceeds $2,000 from anybody in the previous year, then you have a substantial interest. Say you are a real estate broker and you sell a property to somebody and you receive $2,000 as your commission, and that person then tries to rezone property or do whatever, you very well may have a substantial interest in that individual or that entity that purchased the property from which you receive that commission. Those are the 5 substantial interests. Next slide, please. So what can you do if you have a substantial interest to avoid getting in violation of the conflict of interest laws? Basically, there's 2 things that you can do. You can file a statement of substantial interest in advance. And you file those with the county election office of Douglas County. So if you have received a $500 gift certificate from Hy-Vee, you can file a statement of substantial interest recording that. If you own stock in a company, you can file a statement of substantial interest, and then you can handle or address matters involving that entity because you have disclosed that to the public already. The other thing that you can do is you can simply abstain. If you abstain or file a statement of substantial interest, you will be in compliance with the Kansas conflict of interest law. So like I said, those are the 2 things that you can do: file a statement of substantial interest or abstain. And typically, in the past, when we've abstained, we would have you step down from the dais and go to the back room. We'd shut the door. On Zoom meeting, we basically would have you leave the meeting and then let you know when it was done and have you come back because we don't want anyone in the room or doing anything like that so that they can influence their other commissioners. Because in the past, I believe somebody out of Topeka got in trouble, or maybe it was Shawnee County, got in trouble because they abstained from an item and then went back and sat in the back of the room and then was basically giving hand gestures and shaking their heads and gesturing to the commission as to how they wanted the matter to go. They found that to be a problem. All right, the next slide. Now, the penalties for violating the conflict of interest are a little more severe than the Open Meetings Act generally. Violation of it, if you take action on a matter in which you have a substantial interest without filing a statement of substantial interest, and you're convicted of that, it's a Class B misdemeanor. And the penalties for a Class B misdemeanor is fine of $1,000, incarceration up to 6 months, or both. So this is a criminal conviction as opposed to a civil penalty. It would go on your record, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a very, very serious matter. Next slide. If you ever have a question as to whether you have a substantial interest and whether you need to either abstain or file a statement of substantial interest, you have several options. First is probably the more extreme. The easiest is probably just contact our office, and we will, to the best of our ability, give you advice as to what you should or should not do. But if you're not comfortable doing that, and not everybody is, there is a governmental ethics commission, and they will provide a written opinion to you regarding any question. And if you receive a written opinion, that will basically immunize you. Even if a court were to later determine that the governmental ethics commission was incorrect in their determination, you, by acting in accordance with the law, will have immunity. You cannot get into trouble as long as you follow what the governmental ethics commission has given you advice. So you do have that protection. The next slide. Here's their address. If you wanted to write them, you can call them by the phone. They're actually pretty good at responding. It doesn't take them too long to give opinions, because we've sought maybe 2 or 3, I think, in the last 10 years or so, and they've been very helpful. The next slide. And that's it. I guess that's it. Otherwise, you can contact me, and I believe my information or the city attorney's information is on the handouts. And we're always willing to help out, answer questions, and advise you whether you should abstain or whether you can go forward with an action. So I also have included a handout regarding bylaws, which kind of discuss a little bit ex parte communications and quasi-judicial matters and things like that. I'm not going to go over that today. I think that's pretty straightforward, and you guys can read that if you want to. So are there any questions or comments or anything going forward?
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. I guess if people have questions, can they just raise their hand and ask them, or do I need to be calling on people throughout these discussions? Maybe Jeff, is that a question I can direct to you?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Service
Director. I think it's fine for commissioners to raise their hand and just start it. It's not quite as formal as a normal meeting to proceed.
I think you can just start talking.
Mr. Vice Chair, if I may, Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. I have a quick question for either Randy or any of the rest of our staff. It seems to me we've seen one of these statements of substantial interest. Do we file those? I know it's not annually, but do we file those when we come on the commission, or is that something that we only do if we ask for it, and otherwise our regular practice is just to abstain?
Right. You can do that at any time, because substantial interest can arise as during the course of your service on the board. So you can do that at the time you step onto a board. You can amend those, but the city kind of leaves that up to the individual commissioners as to whether or not they want to file a statement of substantial interest. Sometimes commissioner may not be comfortable doing that, so we kind of leave that to the discretion of the commissioner, whether they want to file it and then amend it or change it, or however they want to go forward, or if they just want to simply abstain. We're fine either way, just as long as you're protected from the consequences of not doing either.
I have one more question. This is my last one. So you mentioned that now that we might have to be a little more cautious about talking about past items. One of the things that we've typically done in this kind of training session is to kind of digest how we've acted in the past and try and understand ourselves better and how we want to act in the future. Are you staying for our next hour's worth of discussion so that you could kind of flag any of those that might come up that you think might not be right?
No, this is an orientation meeting and it's open to the public. So this is an open meeting. And so you will, even though you're discussing past business, future business, this is just like a regular meeting, and we are in compliance with COMA, so you can discuss any business that's before you. So you're fine for the next hour. I don't have to flag anything. So
Wonderful, thank you.
yes.
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. I have a question for you, Randy. How many layers to the onion do you have to peel when you're trying to figure out if you have a conflict? Like if there's an applicant that's some sort of business organization and it is comprised of, other people or other entities that own it, and, how far deep do you have to go to figure out if you have a conflict with the ownership group that owns stock in an LLC that's the applicant or whatever?
Right. And that can get tricky. I mean, it can get tricky in a situation where, we've had it where there's, as you say, multiple ownership groups where you might have an ownership or an interest in perhaps a small portion of it. When that's the case comes up, we kind of look at the whole universe of what the applicant is. And if you own 5% or meet any of those requirements regarding the entire ownership group, then that would kick in. And if it's just a small portion of one, it may not kick in. So we kind of just look at it on a universal scale. Also tricky sometimes that we come upon is, we've had attorneys or other, accountants who work in a firm where, an applicant is a client of their firm, even though the individual commissioner did no potential work or did no work for that entity. That entity has paid the firm or the accounting firm or whatever, and some money has come to the individual out of it. And so that, that's also kind of can be a tricky question. In the past, we've typically said if they've not done individual work and you can't track the money specifically to that entity, even though obviously some of the money has come to that partner or whatever, we've said it's typically okay. Again, it's gonna be the individual situation we look at. If it's a huge company that pays a lot of fees, then it might be a different question than somebody who just paid a fee one time.
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner, just a follow-up real quick. If a lot of applicants will have sort of generic names or LLCs or whatever, do we have an obligation to sort of on an individual basis look into the ownership group, like go on the Secretary of State's website and see if this is an LLC that maybe some entity or something I have an interest in or may have represented in the past is involved in?
Yes. I mean, that would be your responsibility. That would be the responsibility of the individual commissioner. Yes.
So we can't just say we were ignorant about it because we didn't look into it or something.
That could be perhaps a defense, and maybe it would work. But I really wouldn't want to take that chance or risk.
Okay. Thanks.
Can I follow up with that? I thought in the state of Kansas that ownership of LLCs was not necessarily public.
It may not be. So, but at the same time, if you have investments and you've contributed money to entities, the state's going to say, well, you know where your money's going. Now, if you don't know that perhaps it's gone around the bend 3 times and come back to you, that may be enough, there might be enough attenuation that you're okay. But at the same time, that perhaps you've invested in this entity and that entity owns a portion of this entity and that type of deal. So the state does expect everyone to kind of track their own money, whether, through all the permutations and everything, you probably have some protection. There's probably some layer of protection there, but I wouldn't risk it.
Sinclair, Planning Commissioner, do we have any other questions? Comments?
Mr. Vice Chair, if I may, just maybe one for staff would kind of like to just touch on there.
Randy, could you kind of touch base about prejudgment a little bit, and has there been any changes to be aware of in that part of the field at all?
No, prejudgment is a due process issue. So basically, whenever you're sitting on a quasi judicial matter or going to make a recommendation on a quasi judicial matter, such as a rezoning or a special use permit, where it's going to basically affect the rights of an individual or an owner, certain due process rights will attach to that ownership of the property. So that basically means that they need to have notice of the hearing, an opportunity to respond, and a fair and impartial tribunal. And basically, a fair and impartial tribunal means somebody's who's going to listen to the evidence and make a decision based on the facts and an application of the law to those facts. So prejudgment would be a situation where a commissioner makes up their mind before they've heard any evidence. And that would be a violation of the due process rights of the owner of the property. So, it's one thing, as commissioners, everybody, you're active in the community and certain things, about certain people. It's not that large a community where everybody that appears before the board that you don't know. But the problem really only results is if you have a closed mind and won't listen to the evidence and won't make a fair decision based on that evidence. And then that's when prejudgment becomes an issue. Now, you may very well have an idea that you're leaning one way or the other based on perhaps you're not fond of the city annexing any more property. So you have kind of a fundamental something against an annexation perhaps, or just in general. That's all fine because that goes basically to your, philosophy as a commissioner. But what you really need to make sure you're always willing to do and able to do is to listen to the evidence and apply the law or apply the city code or the golden factors to that evidence and make what you believe is the most fair and impartial decision based on that evidence. And then due process will have been accorded to anyone, regardless of how you vote.
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. Randy, if I missed this, I'm sorry, and just tell me, but did you go over anything we should bear in mind about taking notes either on notepads or on electronic word processing?
I did not cover that. That's an open records request. So typically, if you make notes for yourself and you maintain those notes, you're not, although you are serve on the board of the city county type of deal, those aren't really open records. Those are your own individual records. Now, to the extent that they're left in the possession of the city or the county, then they would be open records. If you take notes on your own computer, that's your own personal matter, and so they wouldn't be subject to open records. But to the extent that you have a city account or city email or city drive and you do it on a city computer. So for example, I think the city commissioners all are provided email addresses and access to computers and things like that. Sometimes what they do, notes that they take may very well be open records. But if you do it on your own personal matter, personal paper, personal phone, iPad or whatever, and you take that home with you, and that's outside the purview of the city, then that's not subject to open records usually.
So Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. So there wouldn't be a situation where if a decision was challenged, they would try to go find all the things that they had seen us online writing on our notepads.
I can't guarantee that, they couldn't come out from the city through the open records, but I could see a situation where perhaps those records, they could subpoena those records from you individually. And it's been a long time since we've had a case where planning commissioners were involved in an action, but I do remember one from the early 2000s where we had some planning commissioners were actually deposed, and they did have to turn over some information that they had. And I don't know if it was personal notes. I don't know if they requested that, but anyway, that has happened in the past, but it's been almost 20 years ago.
Okay. And so like preservation required, Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner, would preservation of those sorts of things arise normally, like once sort of litigate that we have a reasonable anticipation
Right.
of there being litigation?
Right. If there's some issue relating to something that the planning commission did or did not do, then, we would say, hey, hold on to that. Let's try to make sure that we are in compliance with whatever litigation hold is put into place or that type of deal, so that we can, best defend the commission or any commissioners. It doesn't typically happen. That's the only case I can think of. As a recommending body, you're not making the final decision. So usually those types of ultimate complaints or litigation doesn't arise out of the decision that you guys have made. Now, I couldn't guarantee that someone's not going to say that perhaps the planning commission had made up its mind and prejudged the case, and we're going to bring a due process claim against the planning commission. That would be a difficult case to prove, I would think, but it could theoretically happen.
Thank you, Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. If we have a few more minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, I think, now's the chance, I guess, to ask Randy anything you can think of. I see Eric, go ahead.
Planning Commissioner Eric Struckoff. In terms of the conflict of interest issues, it's useful to remember that even though you may be legally in clear to act on an issue, there's still the appearance of conflict that you might think about as a commissioner, because that's something that the viewing public will think about as well. Sometimes it's not an issue, and you can state that you have a relationship of some kind, but that you don't think it'll influence your vote. But sometimes it is advisable to abstain, even though you might technically be in the clear. That happened on one issue I abstained from last year, even though I got advice that technically and legally I was probably okay to vote on it. It was close enough to a property owned by my company that it would have affected it, and so I did abstain. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about conflicts. Right.
I think that's an excellent point. And that's, 90% of the questions that we have regarding conflicts of interest fall within that category of an appearance of impropriety, as opposed to actually being a substantial interest. Other than the tricky question, as Commissioner Sinclair pointed out, regarding certain ownerships of LLCs, or perhaps whether you're in a firm, the substantial interest is pretty easy question to determine most of the time. But this appearance of impropriety, whether it's a relative who's applying for something before the planning commission, which we've had a couple times occur, or whether it's your next door neighbor, or whether you were previously on a board or previously on a neighborhood association board and you knew something about a potential project, and there might be just an appearance of impropriety. Typically those aren't technically violations of state law, but we kind of leave it up to the commissioner's discretion how comfortable they feel, putting themselves into that position where they can make a decision. And obviously we always advise to make sure that they can be fair and impartial when they do make that decision.
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. Jim, you have a question? Sorry.
Yeah, I just wonder if anybody else has ever received a request directly to the city requesting you not to participate in the application in front of them. That happened to me once, so.
I heard about that one.
So I'm the only one.
Yeah, do you want to elaborate?
That's the only one I'm aware of. I did hear about that one, Jim.
Oh, it was a project that I was the only person at 2 subsequent planning commission meetings to oppose a rezoning. And then I was appointed to the planning commission. Well, actually my appointment was held up until the planning commission and the city commission had decided that issue. And then I came on to the planning commission and I came back for, I think it was for a conditional use permit for one of the particular uses on that property. And there was a request to the city that they prohibit me from sitting at the planning commission meeting on that. So, but that was a case where they met all the requirements. They, all the prior decisions had been made, and I even made the motion to approve it because on the facts and legally, that's what the decision was going to be. So
Right.
it was a little tense because there was some back and forth between the city and me about leaving it up to me whether I sat there. And
Right.
so left it up to me to choose.
And as I recall, the issue was whether or not you believe that you could be fair and impartial. And the one thing that all the commissioners have to be aware is, you all come from individual walks of life, and the valuable thing that you bring to the board is your personal opinions, your personal experiences, and you apply them all to make decisions for the community, or make recommendations at least for the community. And that's what we were looking at. And Commissioner Carpenter said, he could be fair and impartial, even though he had appeared a couple times against a previous project. And so we said that if you can be fair and impartial, it's however you feel. If you feel comfortable to sit on it, it's your decision on that, because there's no state conflict of interest problem.
Sharon Ashworth, Planning Commission. Just a quick question. Are there any restrictions or cautions if we are to attend community meetings at all? Land comes to mind, any individual neighborhood associations, any cautions there when that will then have a project up before the commission?
No, that is fine. Those are all appropriate. I mean, again, you live in the community and you have the right to do all those things. Sometimes we have situations arise where, if 6 of you wanted to attend a land meeting and start talking about things that are going to appear for you, we might have an issue. But you can attend land meetings, or you can attend other neighborhood association meetings. That's all fine and within everybody's First Amendment rights. We just want to avoid a situation where more than 5 of you are going to those types of meetings and conversing and taking actions that would be in violation of the Open Meetings Act. And you won't really have a substantial interest in those organizations. So under the conflicts of interest law, you would not have a problem. Now, it might be a conflict of offices if you held an office in a neighborhood association and we're also serving on the planning commission. That might be a different situation, but that's more of a conflict of office situation. So,
Sharon, I consistently attend the land meetings, and I've attended multiple neighborhood association meetings. My rule of thumb is don't comment on beyond answering questions about process, but actually how I'm feeling about a project. I try my best not to tip a hand, and unless I ask a question, try to get a better understanding of what they're saying, because generally they're going to submit something to us later on. And Becky's at all the land meetings, and so I always rely on her facial expressions as to whether I may be going too far or not. But so far, I think it's been so good.
and that's excellent advice. And the issue there again is you don't want to give the appearance of having prejudged an issue if you start giving personal opinions before you actually hear the item, and that's the concern.
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. By my clock, it's about 9:55, if that's right, and I want to give everyone a little bit of a break. So I hate to cut off. It's good discussion, but thank you, Randy. Is it appropriate then, Becky and Jeff, to take a 5-minute break and reconvene at 10?
Mr. Vice Chair, yep, it's correct. We have it as
At 10 o'clock on your agenda, so we can just leave it there and be back at 10 o'clock, and we'll make preparations to be ready then.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your service to the city. It's invaluable. We really
Thank you so much,
appreciate
Randy.
everything that you do.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you, Randy.
See ya.
ready to move on to our next session, the philosophy of Planning Commission. And I think, Jeff, am I right? Are you going to sort of set the stage here?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. I will do my best, and hopefully Commissioner Struckoff will be able to kind of help guide me if I'm going astray here. But I'll kind of I'll put the ball on the tee, at least, is the best way I can describe it here. Over the years that I've had the chance to work with the Planning Commission and with all the many things that we do, we talk a lot about projects, and we talk a lot about codes and processes and things. We don't necessarily have the opportunity to talk about philosophies of planning and the way the cities work and the way the county wants to develop and grow and how we look at our region as a whole in those items here. So we were going to make this item kind of more about, what is that philosophy that is that threading element in our community? So what does, help us understand when the planning for us works and doesn't work and what our community goals are being. And I think this is a good discussion to have. Plan 2040 was not too long ago, just a couple, few months back at this point in time, where you had a very robust discussion about what were those elements and threads that you wanted to see kind of span through the document. So, to kind of set the stage on this one, I would just, put out there is, what do you all think the promise of planning is to the community, and what is the expectation is? And do those two align necessarily sometimes? And if not, where does it fall short? So think of it as a 30,000-foot level discussion, not necessarily a code level or an application level discussion, but more or less just kind of like how you view planning in our community today. And with that, Commissioner Struckoff, please to help guide me where I've gone off.
No, I think you're right on, Commissioner Eric Struckoff. The philosophy we talk about as the Planning Commission and as individual commissioners is really why we have 10 people on this board. We influence each other. We help each other look at different aspects of the same issue that we might not have thought about before. And those changes come for each of us as commissioners in the form of realizations, change minds, perhaps, surprise, and those all form our collective philosophy as a planning commission. And I think Jeff used the word expectation. I think that's to me, that's one of the big goals of a planning process, and a successful planning process establishes, I think, predictable expectations for the community, for elected officials. And I think that a big part of that development of philosophy is, well, for us, it's the individual perspectives that each of us bring. I'm thinking, of times that, and I'm so grateful and so gratified by the ability of commissioners to change their minds and willingness to change their minds, and listen to points of view that perhaps they haven't considered in the past. And that's certainly true of me. I know there's been numerous times when I have come to a meeting, having read the packet, with questions of my own, or perhaps concerns that are either allayed or new concerns are brought up during the meeting that I hadn't considered previously. Even though I may have visited the applicant or received phone calls or certainly visited the site. I remember one application, I went to the site and talked to the applicant. And I felt very strongly that this project satisfied a lot of goals that our community has. And I thought that the end result was really something we wanted, but getting through, but when we sat down and discussed the process and the kind of corollary effects and that's what we have to think about. We have to think about all the effects that could happen from our decisions, and all the issues that were rolled up in this, and that some commissioners brought and some members of the community brought. I changed my mind during our meeting, and as I said before, that's something that has been very gratifying to me as a commissioner, is to see that ability in my fellow commissioners. and just that open-mindedness. And I think that creating this expectation that is predictability, both for our community and for our elected officials, what to expect, and guidance. I think it's a plan. We make a guide, a comprehensive guide for our community in terms of land use and development. And I think that it's important for that to be a predictable, and that we can have consistent expectations. And I think Jeff used the word expectation. You know, we're not just talking about what we expect to experience when we're a commissioner, but what can the community and elected officials expect from us as a board, and from the direction that we give the community with our decisions as a planning board and our advice to those elected officials. And so I'd be interested to hear what sort of revelatory moments, educational moments, times you've changed your mind, you've been surprised, disappointed, or proud of the work that we've done here on the Planning Commission, without naming names, of course. So with that, I'll open it up to discussion about memorable moments in your Planning Commissioner career.
I'll go ahead and start. Sharon Ashworth, Planning Commission. Not a particular memorable moment, but what I've consistently found as someone who's relatively new is I so appreciate commissioners' ability to look at the larger picture, something that I'm still learning about, what the potential effects are of a particular decision that's made. Since putting together all the pieces of sector plans and Plan 2040 and Transportation 2040, sometimes I find I'm buried in the packet and I'm looking at the details. But when I hear the whole discussion the whole commission talk about it, I hear about, well, how does this, like the decision, one of the decisions we had last night, where there's a property on the edge of the city, those kinds of things that are, when I hear the commission talk about the larger long range impacts of a particular decision and how it fits in with the larger growth areas. I mean, those kinds of things are really valuable to me, and I have changed my mind. As I sit on the commission, I hear a larger perspective that maybe I just haven't quite grasped yet what that impact is.
I think you're muted, Eric.
Thank you. Commissioner Eric Struckoff. Thanks, Commissioner Ashworth. You know, the big picture, I mean, you just mentioned being buried in the packet, you know, and inside those packets, we've seen packets with hundreds and hundreds of pages. And it sometimes is, you know, you're combing through the details. Sometimes you skim, but there's, you know, putting all those pieces together as a planning commissioner, that helps us develop that long-term and as we described, that high level plan. And it's not really, it's beyond the plan, it's how we view that plan as individual commissioners. And I think that's why we have 10 of us on the board, so that we can make sure that we get all those perspectives in there. And like I said, somebody will think of something that I haven't thought of. And that's always good for me as a commissioner, I think. Anybody else?
Well, I'll just speak up, I guess. David Carter, Planning Commissioner. The experiences that I've had that I think have been among the most rewarding in terms of just the overall experience has been when the applicant has had an opportunity to engage with members of the public, you know, in real time. Of course, we say frequently that we appreciate when the applicant has an opportunity to engage with neighbors and things in advance, so that some sort of consensus can be reached before the meeting. But I remember Commissioner Patrick Kelly in his last orientation with us before he became a county commissioner, talking about the Planning Commission as democracy in action. You know, a small d democracy of different interests coming together in real time to solve potential disagreements, and to reach a consensus. And when we as a body can facilitate that, as a commissioner, I find that an extremely rewarding process.
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. I really appreciate the level of trust that I feel with my fellow planning commissioners. I love it when I come to an item and something that I've entirely missed, somebody else catches that and brings it up. And I love it when we have different perspectives, and I love it when we disagree. And I think that we do so respectfully and with the right thoughts for the community in mind. I do worry some about, what voices are we missing? What, if I don't catch it and the other 9 of us don't catch it, is there somebody else who might have? What else is there? Because these, trying to anticipate the whole scope of what we do and the ramifications for it, it's huge. So I do love the trust that I've felt here. I think a lot of it we built during Plan 2040 because we spent so many hours together talking about kind of a little bit more philosophical things than just reacting to items. So I think that gained us a lot, and having those in-person study sessions that we did for so many years, I miss that a lot because it's a safe place to ask questions and learn, and to learn, from each other. And even just coming and going out of a physical meeting space, I think we're missing, and there's nothing we can do about it. I'm just kind of mourning that that we're missing that camaraderie, which I think makes us a better commission. And the reason I kind of flagged that is I was looking over the list of everybody's terms, and not only do we lose Eric and Julia in the next couple of months, which will be devastating. I always hate to lose these people that I've learned to trust. And we've had fabulous people replace, all through the years, but we'll lose another 3 a year from now. And so we'll have, soon a very new commission. We've had a surprisingly small amount of turnover, it seems, in the time I've been here, so that people that were here when I got here will be here when I left, like Jim Carpenter for one, because of finishing unexpired terms and such. But we're going to have a lot of turnover, and how do we gain back that trust and camaraderie if this is the situation that we have to work with? I think that'll be an issue in the future.
I guess I'll speak up again, David Carter, Chair. I'd like to piggyback on what Commissioner Willie just said. And I'll never forget my first meeting. And it was before I actually joined the commission. It was the month before, and I attended to the very end of the meeting just so I could really experience the full spectrum of what I was in for. And something that surprised me a lot, and I'm talking about this particular body because I've been, as a community member, I've been exposed to commissions, a lot of different commissions in the past. And what impressed me immediately about this body of people was kind of the collegial atmosphere. And by that, I don't mean that everybody always agrees with each other, but rather that disagreements are engaged respectfully and patiently, and arguments are given time to work themselves out. And disagreements don't exist just for the sake of disagreement, or for the sake of conflict. I think this has been in the almost 3 years I've been on the commission, a really constructive approach. And I don't know who is responsible for that. I mean, I'm sure it's a collective and cumulative process, but it definitely is different from some commissions that I've been exposed to here in Lawrence in the past. And so I find also that just as a participatory experience, something that's essential to the work of the commission.
Thank you, commissioners. David mentioned the word conflict, and the process of the planning commission is often when inherently that it involves conflict. It's it's often one where there's agreement and conformance to a plan, to process and things, but sometimes, as we know, there's conflict between applicants and neighbors. There's conflict between applicants and the plan. I'm sure there's never any conflict between applicants and staff because staff are truly angelic. But I think that, you know, that resolution of conflict is done in a certain way in this planning commission, with, as Commissioner Carter said, with respect and with an open mind. I think that the turnover we're going to have here in the next few years, year or two, is an opportunity to make sure that, you know, I always look at it as an opportunity and a challenge, but it's an opportunity to reach the kind of goals that we've expressed already as a commission in terms of maintaining and increasing diversity of the diversity of our viewpoints. I'll use that word in this case. And the important thing is that, you know, we have a forward-looking, proactive legislative function where we talk about and create plans and amend our plans, and then we have this judicial function where people come in and ask us to approve, and we are bound to consider certain aspects of those. For instance, in our rezonings, we talk about the golden factors. We are charged with making these considerations for each of these factors, but we are not charged with deciding one way or the other on each of those factors. And so when we sit in commission meeting or on Zoom and we have a disagreement, we might be having just a simple disagreement over how each commissioner may feel about that particular aspect, which is perfectly legitimate, and that's what we're supposed to do. And that's why, again, we have 10 people on this board, so that those perspectives can all be heard. And as Commissioner Willie also said, somebody will think of something that I hadn't thought about, and that's, I think, part of the most important part. Anybody else?
I might add, Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. We have not always been a healthy body. We have since I've been here, and I think much of that work was actually done by my direct predecessor, Bruce Lease, from what I hear. But my first interaction with the Planning Commission as an applicant, or our church had an item and I didn't speak, but I came and I watched and listened and was pretty horrified by the way the Planning Commission treated each other, the way they spoke to the public, the culture that we have now as a body. We can't take it for granted. It's pretty easy to lose that. So I just kind of, as we have some massive amounts of turnover, this is what we want to hold on to, what we want to keep and transmit to, you know, the people that we bring on board in the future.
Thanks, Commissioner Willie. The culture, that's exactly, that. I think that sums up what I was stumbling over there a moment ago. Exactly what I think it's going to be so important to preserve on this commission. Commissioner Carpenter?
Yeah, I've had those experiences that Karen just brought up in I guess some of my first forays in front of the Planning Commission in, I think, 2000 and 2001, where commissioners sniped at each other, insulted each other, expressed with body language extreme dislike of others by spinning around in chairs toward the wall and throwing their hands up in the air in frustration, and how they spoke to the public, just talked down to the people that were standing below them in the way our commission room is set up. It was pretty bad. So when I got on the commission, I was exposed to different ideas, which was incredibly valuable to me by the composition, and coming onto a commission that didn't have that attitude was a surprise. Although I'd been in front of them the 2 months prior to me coming on, which only Eric and Rob are here to remember that. But even when I came in and spoke, and I threw them for a loop my first time, just by doing the typical applicant, I don't know what I'm going to say except throw all the spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks, which worked for a month. it was with respect, and it's been that way the whole time, and I hope that that continues from this time forward. I just was curious. The thing that I've valued most about at least this group is we often are the first commission that actually discovers conflicts or failings of new plans or new ordinances. We've had that recently, and we find those conflicts, and I think we do pretty well in fleshing out those problems, and which can subsequently react in constructive changes by the legislative bodies. But change is slow, and we find ourselves right now in that continuous conflict of we have Plan 2040, which has the force of law, but our plans and development code don't match that particular set. And I am very grateful that we have pretty much come to a consensus that I think is pretty well known that we are going to stick with Plan 2040, and the rest needs to catch up. And I'm very grateful that everyone has been able to have those conversations and give that better information to the other commissions. And I'd like to just kind of change one question just slightly. And I'm kind of curious for the newer members of the commission, what's been most beneficial to you in learning how to make decisions or in your role as a planning commissioner? Where's the best help been coming from?
If I may, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sands has his hand raised. I believe he wants to
Chime in on an item real quick.
Rob Sands, Planning Commissioner. It's okay. Just, well, I'll filibuster while the new commissioners think of a response to Commissioner Carpenter's questions. Going back to the original question of, or one of the original questions of some hopes and some and maybe some disappointments. I wouldn't say disappointment is such a strong word, but in my reading of some of the planning culture articles out there, Strong Towns, City Lab, and others. I'm on too many to remember. Market Urbanism Report. There's several. It feels to me like the innovation in planning is starting to address that granular level of almost a block by block usage. We've got an ADU, we've got some ADU language in Lawrence, but is it actually usable? And as I read these articles, I wonder that question out loud: is our ADU usage or ADU language usable to to folks, or are we realizing conflicts in code and frustrating some of that granular, small scale granular development? Same thing with neighborhood commercial. Are the conditions really set through code, through use by right in primarily residential neighborhoods to encourage neighborhood that neighborhood commercial uses, and those conditions have to be set before we can, in my opinion, those conditions really have to be set in the code language before we can get those great neighborhoods that we all recognize that people want to live in. 1900 Barker, can that be replicated everywhere in Lawrence? Probably not. But do the conditions exist to replicate that in a couple more places in Lawrence? I'm wondering if that's the case. Not that we do a bad job, or not that staff does a bad job, or it's an incredibly complex environment, starting at the federal level, going all the way down to the interaction of laws and codes, et cetera, et cetera. It's just when I look at some projects, I go, are the conditions really set to create a better neighborhood in wherever I'm visiting, whether it's used to be friend's house or in my own neighborhood. That's all I was going to say. Thanks.
Sharon Ashworth, Planning Commission. Just thinking about Commissioner Struckoff's question, and the comment I was going to make before he posed that question, kind of dovetail. I was wondering how, when the turnover does happen and when new commissioners come on board, if there was something we could do to help maintain the culture we've all been speaking of, and the cooperation and the collegiality. So, within open meeting laws, I mean, is there some thing? Because one of the things I found when I came on board was I read a lot of things and tried to get used to, how the packets were formed and things like that. But honestly, I had never had really any discussions with any of the other commissioners for the most part. I believe I chatted to some extent, which was very helpful, with Commissioner Carpenter before, but it would have been nice to somehow kind of get to meet others and get a feel for where everybody was coming from. Why are you here? How long are you here for? Just general philosophical discussions, get to know you. I think that might go a long way in continuing the culture of this commission. I don't know what's possible, but I would have felt that would have been very helpful for me to so I've just been sort of figuring people out as we go, trying to get to know people. And when the new people come on board, hopefully, just not having the COVID restrictions will be extremely helpful with that. But I'm just wondering, is there something that we can do when the turnover happens to maintain that?
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. I don't want to hijack it, but I think that's a great point, Sharon. I feel like I completely agree with what Karen said about Plan 2040 and the sheer number of hours we all were together for that. And that's not even counting like the time that Karen and I think Clay Britton before her and other folks on the commission were spending on the steering committee outside, but us as a commission together spent so much time on that. But beyond that, I've really always appreciated the social gatherings we usually have with orientation, or before or after it, when we in the last 2 or 3 times have been at Karen's house. I've also really enjoyed the times when we've just stole away after a meeting and just headed down to Free State. I think the last time we did that, I can't remember if it was when Scott left or if it was when we wrapped up Plan 2040. But we went down there and I thought that was really beneficial, because that's a time when we can engage on those sorts of conversations less formally and get to know each other. And I don't know if we'll have another opportunity like we did with Plan 2040 to really hash things out hours and hours on end. But it seems like we could make opportunities for ourselves to, I guess we could be more intentional about trying to create collegiality by not just showing up for meetings, within the prescribed time that we're supposed to be there, but maybe trying to aim for more opportunities just to get together socially, head on down to Free State. And I guess as I say that, I don't even know those sorts of things. We can't do it during the pandemic, number one, but number two, assuming it ends and we're able to do those sorts of things over the next year or so, or half year or year, what requirements there are under COMA if we just go to Free State after a meeting, for instance, and are just going to engage socially and not talk about like the agenda. I guess those are things we'd have to broach with staff or with Randy. That's an option, I think.
I know a guy with an outdoor pizza oven.
Perfect.
I think following up on Commissioner Ashworth's question about
maintaining the culture. How do we do that? And I think Commissioner Sinclair has a good idea in perhaps keeping relationships open outside of the meeting times. But these might also get back to Commissioner Carpenter's question about what's most beneficial. Certainly what we're talking about with Commissioner Ashworth and Sinclair's questions were kind of overall philosophy of the Planning Commission. But I think Commissioner Carpenter, and this would dovetail into that, what has been beneficial to individual commissioners. Perhaps that culture has been beneficial to them. Certainly, I had some recollection of Planning Commission before I was on there, similar to Commissioner Carpenter's, and when I joined, it was far different than and my previous experience had been, and I was thankful for that. And I think, kind of in partial answer to Commissioner Ashworth's question, is the way to maintain that culture is to be that example, to be that person, and make that the culture that new commissioners come into. Make it expected, make it be known that that is how we work. And but the way to sustain it is to live it, I think. With that, back to Commissioner Carpenter's question about, for individual commissioners, what's been most beneficial for you? Commissioner Shanklin.
Greg Shanklin, Commissioner. I don't want this to sound gratuitous, but it probably will. But to respond to Commissioner Carpenter's question about what's been most helpful, I'd like to respond to the original question about experience. And for me, it's the experience I haven't had, and that is participating in the Plan 2040 process, and particularly to hear Commissioner Willie talk about it. I really wish I would have been there. Every month when I read the packets and reflect on what this means under the 2040 plan, I'm a lawyer, so I'm in the business of interpreting ancient texts. And when you look at legislative history or what the framers of the Constitution intended, you always wish you would have been there to understand what they were really thinking at the time. And so I guess that is another way of saying that the interactive process around, that is the interactive process among planners and planning commissioners around the creation of a plan is a binding experience. And so every time I listen to you guys talk about it, I learn something more. So that's my my response to those questions.
If I may, I'd like to just speak up really quickly. I'm sorry, Commissioner Ashworth, were you going to say something? Okay. To answer Commissioner Carpenter's question, since I'm one of the newer commissioners, staff, I don't want to underestimate the importance of staff. So when I joined the commission, Jeff was the liaison with the commission, as Becky is now. And whenever I had a question, preparing for a meeting, I was uncertain. I didn't quite understand what a particular issue represented. I would often make an appointment with Jeff, and he would patiently walk me through the issue, give me the history and context that I needed. And I think that gets back to our fundamental role as this intermediary between planning staff and the public and the elected officials. We are the body that is accorded the right and responsibility to kind of debate and to expound on these issues. We obviously don't dedicate the time and attention that staff does. I mean, so diligently preparing those packets and reports, but we kind of hash it out in front of the public and sort of in the service of the elected officials. And and so to answer Commissioner Carpenter's question, staff has been invaluable. One thing I just wanted to say about this idea of how do we, the fragility of the collegial atmosphere and how we carry it forward, I'd just propose that it's up to all of us to continue to maintain that, as new commissioners come on, to set that example. I think, the chair of the commission at any given time sort of sets the tone, especially in a Zoom environment where the chair more or less controls the floor in a way that is impossible in a public gathering. I just think that all of us should continue to set that positive example as new commissioners come on, and hopefully we can keep carrying that forward.
Chair Nashua, Planning Commission. I was going to mention how helpful the staff is, so piggybacking on Commissioner Carter's example, but I do have one observation that I wonder, you mentioned hashing things out, and sometimes I find that there's an awful lot of silent time when Commissioner Carter is begging, basically, someone to speak. And that it's been difficult for me to figure out what's going on sometimes as a relatively new person when people aren't talking and bringing up opinions and asking questions. I imagine it's also frustrating for staff when people aren't voicing their concerns, their opinions, their questions, not only with the back and forth between the public, but the back and forth between the staff. And sometimes I feel that when staff has been asking for a direction from the commission, okay, what do you want to happen here? There's an awful lot of quiet up on the commission. And I imagine that can be kind of frustrating. So I just open that up as there's more silence than I would have anticipated coming in.
Commissioner Carter here. I'd love to be able to just respond to that point because I think it's a great observation, and I'd love to hear other people, but I just want to let you know that silence is intentional from my point sometimes, where I, as chair, especially during these remote meetings, I feel a responsibility to fill the silence, but sometimes I feel a responsibility to let people sit with the silence, because silence can be really uncomfortable, and it equalizes the responsibility of all commissioners to say something. And whether that's a wise strategy or whether it's an enjoyable strategy to participate in, it probably isn't. And for the public too, it's probably odd and uncomfortable. But it is where we can't look around and make eye contact with each other and sort of like, I'm going to say something. It's my approach, also garnering my experience as an instructor in group experiences. When you ask a question, sometimes letting people sit with silence can be a mechanism for forcing everybody to feel that equal responsibility to move things forward.
I agree. As when I was chair, I was told the silence is healthy and you should, allow it. And it feels so much longer than it actually is if we looked at our watch. And it probably shows that I struggle with the silence because I am usually ready with a question to fill it, whether that's the healthy thing or not.
Yeah, I'd echo that. When you sit up there as chair, as David said, you feel you got to fill it, but sometimes it's best not. And the what we're missing of in person, also, as David said, is seeing that body language of a commissioner that sometimes is reluctant to talk, because we've had those commissioners, and just calling on them. Oh, it looks like you might have something to say, and then you get some wonderful response that's very thoughtful, that can really have an impact. So it's kind of it's a group facilitation method, it's a mediation technique, it's a negotiation technique, and I think a lot of us have had those types of trainings, and yeah, they're uncomfortable and they make for bad TV, but I think sometimes we get some good good information after we do that. And it might even prompt going in a completely different line of thought than we've had before.
You know, Planning Commissioner Eric Struckoff, we also are expected to think on the fly when we're in the middle of a meeting. We take in new information, we take in each other's perspectives, those of the public, and the recommendations and advice and perspectives of the staff. And we add those to our own perspectives while the meeting is going on. And so it's perfectly natural to have a moment to coalesce these ideas as we receive them in the meeting, because as we said before, we don't come in with all of those perspectives already in us. We receive them, we assimilate them, and we make an informed judgment based on that new information. And sometimes I certainly have to sit there and digest what I've just found out or just learned about somebody else's experience. And I'm sure that it disappoints both of our viewers on TV to sit there through the silence, but sometimes I'm just thinking about it for now.
Sharon Asher, Planning Commission. I don't mean to advocate for action-packed city commission TV shows. It's just sometimes I feel like it's an overwhelming reluctance to speak, which I understand because it's unnerving sometimes to speak. And as my mangled responses sometimes will show that, I haven't quite formed complete thoughts sometimes when I open my mouth, and it's hard to do that. But it is so valuable to hear from everybody on each issue, regardless if it's a fully formed thought. That's sort of my personal challenge, is to get out there and not be reluctant and not be shy and not be and to realize that I have a role to play here. I need to participate in some form. So that's what I'm talking about so much, is I would like everyone on the commission to feel comfortable enough to go ahead and speak their question, their opinion, their concerns, rather than being reluctant to speak.
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. When we had Patrick Kelly here, and I learned so much from Patrick Kelly, and he used to talk about, trying an idea on for size, because starting from someplace that isn't quite right, but starting is a really powerful thing. But that takes a lot of trust in order to throw something out there that is being recorded, and feeling like that's a sound bite you could be held to. I just think we're recorded whether we're in person or not, so there's that. But I think when we are in person, I think that camaraderie is a little bit more helpful, because with body language, we can kind of show that, we're digesting an idea that we're not expecting to stick with, but we're needing to start somewhere. So, but you're right. It's hard. It's hard to step into something so public when we're all trying to find our way forward.
David Carter, Commissioner, I'd just like to piggyback on both those observations. Commissioner Ashworth, I think the point you raised about, I guess I'm going to interpret it through my own lens and my own experience. Sometimes the question of whether my point of view is worth expressing. Is it going to impress people? Is it going to influence people? Or am I just, thinking out loud? That can be really intimidating. And to be honest, I'm not sure prolonged silence necessarily is the way to uncork that bottle. So your observation is one that will sit with me as the current chair, I think, in upcoming meetings, that sometimes silence is something that needs to be broken through an invitation to share a point of view, sort of like Commissioner Carpenter mentioned, and not just wait for the silence to be broken, but maybe sometimes to directly ask some commissioners to share their thoughts. So it's an interesting, it's some useful feedback. And I'm not sure if that's how you intended it, but it's something that will sit with me. So thank you.
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. Kind of going back to, the influx of new commissioners that we'll have over the next couple of years. I wondered if it isn't worth, assigning a mentorship relationship just to get somebody up and started. On one hand, you want to bring somebody's new ideas, so you don't want to squash any of that, but kind of as a way of kind of continuing this culture of especially the respect for people that come to present to us from the public, because that is so incredibly hard. But just, I don't know if that's worth something, semi-formal, just to kind of get us started off the bat. I know Greg and I had some good conversations as he was coming on, not so much for me to influence any of his thoughts, but just process and who we are and that sort of thing. I don't know if that was helpful. I hope so.
We've got just a few minutes left in this session. I think we veered off a little bit from what the beneficial aspects that Mr. Carpenter had mentioned earlier. But I would also echo Commissioner Carter's remarks about staff. I was looking at remembering some very, very large packets, 500 plus pages. I was looking through one recently that involved, well, it had the comprehensive plan, it had affordable housing, it had a residential lot inventory, all things we talked about on the same night. And I look at a 500-page packet, and there's no way I could do this without having all that preparation. It's gotten better and better. The lead times have gotten better and better. And I'm just very grateful for that on behalf of the commission. And certainly it's made my job possible at all. Any last thoughts from commissioners about your personal experiences? Commissioner Ashworth.
No, you were marking staff, and I just remember I looked through this again. This is our staff suggestion box. And so I just had a general question of how staff thought we were doing with this suggestion box. If there were any comments.
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services, be happy to speak, I guess, on behalf of staff in that capacity. I think I can really say this on behalf of the Planning Division, is that it's genuinely a pleasure to work with you all, and you all definitely engage us and also, keep us active and on our toes and understanding what those dynamics are in the community. So I think, we have always been appreciative of your time and the effort that you put in behind the scenes, and we always try to make sure that our product meets your expectations so you can render a decision on those days where we have you come in to do those items there. So I think I would just say is staff is appreciative of the work you do and thinks you're doing a great job on that one. And we always appreciate the mid-month meetings in many ways, because that's a time for us to kind of share some of the things that we're doing that you don't get to see sometimes. It doesn't quite reach to your level. And when we lost that during 2020, staff really, we took that a little hard, truthfully, because we wanted to be able to show you that work that we were doing, kind of keep you all informed of the things that were going on. So when we lost that as part of our COVID thing, that it didn't set right with staff, I guess is a good way of saying it. We wanted to show you some of the things going on. That way you could see all the work that was going on that might not always come to your business meetings. But no, I think on that suggestion box that we always include in your package there, I think is great, and we really appreciate all the wonderful work you do and all the feedback you give us. We really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you, commissioners, for your input in this session. I'll turn it over to Vice Chair Sinclair. Thanks again.
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. Thank you, Eric, so much for facilitating that, and commissioners for sharing and discussing. It's 10:50. I think we're ready for a break, followed by our third and final session, and hopefully we'll be joined by most, if not all, of the commissioners on the governing bodies. So let's, I guess, break for 10 minutes and be back at 11 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you.
don't like how like the way that it adds names to this list.
Does it kind of like scatter it or something?
Yeah, you'd think it would just like stack up, but sometimes it seems like it does.
Kurt, you ready? Yep. Commissioner Sinclair, the room is ready.
Thank you, Jeff. Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair, Planning Commissioner. Want to welcome all of those of you who just recently joined us, members of the Board of County Commissioners and the Lawrence City Commission. I haven't had a chance to make sure everyone's here, but I assume you are. Welcome Chair Portillo, Vice Chair Reed, Patrick Kelly of the Board of County Commissioners, and Mayor Finkeldye, Vice Mayor Shipley, and Commissioners Boley, Larson, and Ananda. Thank you so much for joining us. We're pleased to see you here and to have a discussion amongst all of us. And we don't have a lot of time, 50 minutes to be exact, maybe a little more than that. And I know there are probably some topics on your mind. There are some, I think, probably on the Planning Commission's mind. So I think we ought to just jump in and make the most of our time. And fortunately, we have Commissioner Jim Carpenter, who's been willing to, sort of graciously been willing to facilitate a discussion. He's been on the board, the Planning Commission, a long time. He's one of our longest serving commissioners, and I think is well suited to be able to guide us as we talk about some general topics about how we can help you all. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Commissioner Carpenter.
Thank you, Luke. And thank you for everyone joining us. I think this is the first time in my memory we've actually had every city commissioner and every county commissioner at the same time. Perhaps that's a function of Zoom. I don't know, because we couldn't get everybody there offering a free lunch in the past, but this time we have you all. So on our agenda, this says this is a discussion regarding the role of the Planning Commission and how best they can serve the governing bodies as a recommending body. So I think we'll just skip the time wasting formality of going around and introducing each other, because we only have about 45 minutes here. And we have some probably big topics that everybody wants to talk about. So I want to kind of frame this, maybe go to the county commission and then to the city commission quickly to find out what the most pressing issues are to them that are coming before the planning commission at times, and how best we can facilitate your discussions by teasing out those problems in different policy issues and planning issues, and what kind of information we can draw out at our meetings that would help you. And then I hope to get some input from the planning commissioners on what we would benefit from coming back from both the city and the planning commission to give us better insight or better information as we make our discussions. And this is, I think maybe we can start with Mayor Finkeldye just to get a current perspective of the city commission. And, Mayor Finkeldye happened to be a planning commissioner, so that gives him an interesting perspective on how he could address these questions.
Thanks. And I'm not sure I can speak for all the city commissioners, so I'm sure they can jump in here and correct me. But, I'd start by saying from my time on the planning commission, we always had to be really nice to Dinny, because she was the one drafting the minutes, and she would say, she'd summarize what we said, and that's what the commissioners got to read, is the summary of each of the minutes. So we'd, give Dinny chocolates and stuff to make sure she made it sound good. But now you have the videos, and I think, really that's one of the best things, to be able to sit back and watch those meetings, and not only for your discussion, but also to hear what members of the public are saying as well, who may or may not come to our meeting. And I remember, Commissioner Amix, or Mayor Amix at the time, saying this when I joined the commission. I think it's still true. It's very helpful for everyone to kind of give their explanation, as they lead up to the vote. obviously not every single time do we need all 10 comments. I'm not, I can fast forward through some of that, but certainly of anything that has some controversy to it or some analysis there, it's certainly helpful to hear the comments of, I mean, you can vote yes, but vote yes for many different reasons, or vote no for many different reasons. So having those explanations help frame the issues when they come up to us. And even when it's a 10-0 vote and it ends up on our consent agenda, I know sometimes it's a 10-0 vote, but not always, again, for the same reasons. And being able to see that and think that through for the next project that comes along, I think is a very helpful part of the process. It helps staff understand how to process things. It helps us understand where you guys are coming from, even when it ends up on our consent agenda. So I appreciate that end of it, but don't know if others on the commission want to add in there.
I might as well open it up to the other city commissioners here for maybe brief opening statements. And if there are topics you'd like to try to address, just kind of give us what that is and we'll see what we can get to. Commissioner Ananda?
Just very quickly, thank you. I wanted to also talk about our strategic plan and how those pieces are coming into our decision making as well, in addition to all of your comments. And so if that's something that the Planning Commission could also consider as you're looking through those, I think that those are sometimes pieces that we don't always consider on the face of a decision that we're making, but they will be part of the process that the commission is considering.
Thank you, Commissioner Ananda. Any other city commissioners with a brief opening statement? All right, I'll turn to the County Commission. Chair Portillo, you're one of our newer representatives. And so I guess the question is, in your brief tenure so far and in preparing for your role, what is it that we could do to better assist you in becoming more comfortable with the planning process and your decision making?
Well, thank you, Jim, and thank you all for gathering us all today. I do really appreciate all of the time of fellow commissioners, both county commissioners and city commissioners, and everyone on the Planning Commission for taking the time to have this conversation and facilitate this conversation. I agree with a lot of what Mayor Finkeldei brought up. He has a lot more kind of background having served on the Planning Commission, but I think overall, hearing the thoughts of all of the planning commissioners when it comes to how votes were decided and what went into some of those decisions is really important. I know that in conversations that the County Commission has already had over the past few weeks, really thinking through how decisions of planning commissioners coincide with the 2040 plan and how we can kind of think through the role of our Plan 2040 with what's happening both the city and county level, and thinking about kind of how broadly we think through the role of the Planning Commission throughout the county. I know we're having a lot of discussions around our unincorporated areas. And so hearing how you're balancing growth in the cities and our broader unincorporated areas in the county and the expertise that you all are bringing to that, really appreciate those pieces. And we're really fortunate to have Commissioner Kelly, who also has that Planning Commission background, and to help us through some of those discussions and decisions on the County Commission. So I'll open it up to my fellow county commissioners for their thoughts as well.
Thank you. Vice Chair Reed, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Sure, briefly. Thanks, Jim, and thanks everybody for inviting us and gathering. Zoom does open up the opportunity for more people to show up sometimes. I think that I've experienced that a lot in the past year. So thanks for your time. I think I'm very much in a phase of listening and learning and working to understand your processes on the Planning Commission and kind of connect all of those dots. I think that something I know I will be looking to in site plans and land use issues that come before the county commission is just wanting to really know what the environmental impact of those plans are, which I know is a part of the process in a variety of ways, but really highlighting how we've come to understand what the environmental impact of those planning decisions are. And of course, floodplains is a part of that conversation. And I know something that we're always thinking about and hoping for more updated maps soon to be able to really know where all of those floodplains exist. So I think that that's something you all are already talking about, and I plan to pay particular attention to as those items come before the county commission.
Thank you, Commissioner. That brings us to Commissioner Kelly, who I think a majority of us on the Planning Commission had the pleasure of serving with for at least a brief while. So tell us, now that you've switched roles, most recent of all the elected officials from Planning Commission to County Commission, and you've led these discussions in the past. Are we meeting the standards that you talked about with us in the past, or are there areas we could improve in?
Well, first of all, thanks for doing the work you're doing. These are long meetings, I know, and I know that a lot of times you have some competing values working against each other. And I guess one thing I would ask you to do is continue to elevate those competing values as they show up and talk about them. Because sometimes, especially I think between Plan 2040 and some of our area plans, there is tensions on either side of that. There's tensions between neighbors and property owners. And especially if sometimes it feels like when I watch your videos that you want to all agree. And I would encourage you not to always agree, that we need to hear where those conflicts are. We need to feel those tensions and make sure we're getting them heard. It does sometimes surprise me when we get votes that are, 8-0, 9-0 from the Planning Commission. I'm thinking that there are lots of issues here. How did we get to 9-0? And so I think when we say talk, that's what we want you to do. We want to hear those challenges and sort of how you worked through those challenges. And that's just really helpful to me. I think we're at a really interesting point here because 2040 is there and it has some real aspirations in it that I don't know that we have the technical tools to meet those aspirations just yet. And Jeff's heard me pick on him a little bit, of keep pushing to get some of these things like area plans done, because I think there's a pressure from, the tiered system that's in Plan 2040 and the expectations of community benefits that I don't think many developers have tested yet. And so the path of least resistance is to come out to the unincorporated areas and essentially do subdivisions in the unincorporated areas. So I think that's something we're going to have to deal with and that we need to work on, as governing bodies and as a planning commission.
Commissioner Kelly, watch our meeting from just 2 days ago, because that's got a couple of those issues headed your way right now. So thanks. I'd like to just maybe make a quick comment about the votes. I think maybe you're correct. Sometimes we spend a lot of time looking for that compromise that we can all agree on, which is why you get those unanimous votes. But I think our discussion generally goes through many or most of the issues. I'm sure we're still missing some because I know we don't have all the perspectives that we probably should have on the commission. We're pretty homogenous group, but it's a highly dedicated and educated group, as you all know. So sometimes our conversations get pretty off in the woods and they come back, but generally we reach a consensus and vote on that. But once in a while, you'll get those dissents that end up changing something. But I wouldn't put too much emphasis on this just having a unanimous vote, although it does have an impact on how you have to make decisions down the road. And I think there are many of us that realize that, and you'll get dissenting votes just so to prompt your discussion so that you don't, and you actually don't have to have those super majorities. But that's something we've talked about in the past, but without our having in-person monthly mid-month meetings, we've not been able to really keep up on that. So I just want to remind everyone on the Planning Commission also that there is value in having that dissent, because it opens up avenues for the elected bodies in what course of action is available to them also, and what flexibility they have. Anyway, with that, I did neglect to note those others that have joined us. I want to welcome City Manager Craig Owens and County Manager Sarah Plinsky, Tanya Voigt from the County Planning Office, and of course, Jeff Crick, our City Planning Director, who's been with us all morning. But thank you all for joining us today too. So maybe I'll turn briefly to Chair Carter of the Planning Commission, just to see what types of issues he would like to bring up for the City and County Commissions to consider.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. David Carter, Planning Chair. Listening to the elected officials is so important. So I'm going to make a point of trying to restrict my comments because I'd like to do more listening than talking today. We don't generally get to have this kind of interaction, and it's extremely valuable to me. And I think one of the things that chairs of commissions start to reflect on, past the midpoint of their term, is that you just start feeling comfortable with what you're doing at about the time your term is running up. One of the things that has been occurring to me a lot, it's one of the things when I first joined the commission that has been on my mind a lot lately. We just finished a discussion of the philosophy of planning. And as somebody who actually studied planning in graduate school many years ago, one of the things that is always with me is the trace. You could call it a scar, but in any event, the mark that planning as a practice leaves on the landscape and in our community. And the practice of planning has a long history. It's shaped our community locally in different ways. And one of the things I would love to be able to do is to look at how that practice, how the community and the physical environment that we live in today has been shaped by planning decisions in the past. Carrying that to the present day, every one of the decisions that we make today will have some sort of influence on the physical environment and on our, on social interactions in our community going forward. And it feels like an awesome responsibility. So I said in our past session something that stuck with me from an orientation a couple of years ago, just before Commissioner Kelly left the Planning Commission, was the role of planning as an interface in the community. I think he used the words, democracy in action. It's basically when members of the community from different interests are coming together in real time and engaging with each other. In a broader sense, I think that's what we do as a commission is we are the interface between the professional planning staff and you, our elected officials. And so with that, I do want to wrap up and just say, I look forward to listening a lot, because I feel our service to the community in large part is helping planning staff present you with the full range of information and viewpoints that you need to make sound decisions as our elected representatives.
Thank you, Commissioner Carter. I guess maybe we can open this up and have some more in-depth discussion. I'd start with Commissioner Ananda brought up about the strategic plan. Pretty much in our packets, it just says the impact. We have one line and it doesn't really tell us much about impacts on strategic plan for the city. Could you kind of tell us a little bit more about what kind of information you would be looking for, or discussion on our part that would be helpful to you?
Thanks, Jim. I think that we are new to this as well. So we are open to seeing how that process unfolds in planning. I know that it's not, directly a document that is in front of the Planning Commission and is part of your considerations. And so how we start to bring in those factors that the commission has set, the city staff has set as those measures of how well we're doing moving toward that. But I think that there is space for really looking at what Chair Carter was saying, the intersectionality of how all of the decisions that we make have an impact on our community as a whole, not just now, but also in the future. And are we moving toward or are we moving away from something? Because very rarely are we standing still on any issue. So, Commissioner Reed, Vice Chair Reed said that there was a need to assess our impact on the environment in every decision that we make. We know that the decisions that we make also have an impact on equity, even if there's not a direct line in our view on those impacts. Looking at the economic sustainability of our community, all of those things come together. And I think that we're all learning very quickly that all of these things impact each other, regardless of where we sit, whether we're talking about planning or zoning or bus schedules. They're all interrelated. And so I don't have, a plan for how planning can plan with our strategic plan. But how do we bring all of those things together and acknowledge that these are the factors that the city is going to be looking at, in addition to your very thoughtful and thorough discussions?
Thank you. That just kind of reminds me, our charge is to apply the codes and the plans to the facts in front of us, which is Plan 2040 opens that a bit so we can talk about more. So I know we've had discussions where various planning commissioners have expressed they don't want to vote for something because of this impact on the environment, but we feel like we're limited to what's before us. So that kind of brings us to, as was mentioned by Commissioner Kelly, the need to get plans and codes updated to give us the tools that we can make those better decisions. And that's certainly something well beyond the Planning Commission's ability, but it's within your roles that to let us get to make these larger considerate decision-making process here. We kind of need those tools to come through. So, because right now, by the law, we're kind of limited. So I would like just to skip over to Commissioner Kelly, because he brought up about Plan 2040 and area plans, and that's a big discussion we're having all the time. So how can we better help in facilitating that progress while you try to help get these plans updated so we have the tools we need?
Well, I think you gave the answer in your question, Tim. We need you to get those plans updated. I mean, that's so that they align. I mean, there's some real conflicts with the area plans with the goals of 2040. It's very clear in 2040 that we're trying to preserve the environment and the rural landscape. And yet in some of our area plans, it talks about business and industry out there in tier 3. And so, what happens is you have a developer who holds up the area plan and a neighbor who holds up Plan 2040 and says, which one am I supposed to follow? And that's a good question. and I think that's where we get into a pickle. So I know there's a lot of priorities that need to be done, but those plans, I just feel like we continually ask for trouble when we do conflicting statements to the public on what is the plan. I think especially in tier 3, we've got to think about that a little bit. What does tier 3 look like? What kind of development? Because right now it's sort of set up that no development can happen in tier 3. And so we end up with this sort of moat around the city of Lawrence as people jump over tier 3 and go straight to the unincorporated area. And I think if you haven't, Chad Voigt did just a fantastic presentation recently to show what happens if we develop 3 to 5 acre plots in the unincorporated areas, and then the city grows into that space. And I would really recommend Chad and Tanya come visit with the Planning Commission to see what that looks like. We have some really great examples here in Lawrence of when that's happened in the past. And some of you I know are familiar with those, but I think it's just a really powerful presentation to understand how the decisions we make today or the decisions we don't make today can affect us long down the line.
Thank you. That one of those items was on our agenda Wednesday, and we had a long conversation about that and kind of had the same idea. So I'd like to turn over to the city commission. Any city commissioners with thoughts about the development applications that are occurring in tier 2 that, by definition will be city infrastructure is close enough to extend and will most likely be annexed in the next 10 to 20 years. So are there any considerations that you would like the Planning Commission to pay special heed to when we see requests for development in tier 2? Mayor Finkeldine.
I'll jump in, and before I answer that question, I would note that if all the planning commissioners can look at our agenda for Tuesday, and there was going to be a discussion on Tuesday night about adding up to 3 planners to the planning department. 1 to help process plans, and 2 planners to help do neighborhood plans and start on the code revisions. There's a significant dollar amount associated with that we also have to figure out how to pay for. But I think, Commissioner Shipley and Commissioner Lawson both brought that up. And so Jeff and his staff and the city manager are reporting back to us on that. But, of course, the more work we get from the staff, the more work we send to the Planning Commission. So you can thank us for later meetings already. But going back, so take a look at that, and I'd like your feedback on that. You guys are on the front lines of that. But as it relates to tier 2 and tier 3, I think again that's part of the importance of getting the codes up to speed related to Plan 2040, in my opinion. One of the reasons for those tiers, as I read Plan 2040, is because we want to encourage infill development. But we need our code up to date to allow for that infill development and consider that infill development, and in maybe some ways make that infill development easier than developing outside the city. And without that, you get the tension of, well, it's really hard to build in the city. You don't want us to build in the county, but we bring an infill development project and we get a lot of resistance, and we have a lot of codes, and we have a lot of issues. So do you really want us to build in the city, or do you want us to go out in the county? And so I think that's part of the equation too, is making sure our codes in the city are supporting that infill development. But then you're right. I think as we look at Area 2 and Chad Voigt's presentation, one day the city of Lawrence might be out there, and we need to be planning in advance for that. And the 3 to 5 acre plots out there that block our roads, block our orderly development, block the ability to have density out there is certainly a concern. So some of those area plans consistent with Plan 2040 are important, and hopefully we'll get to those soon.
Thank you. That's really good news about increasing the planning staff, because I know we are constantly bringing up that issue of the conflict between the current area plan and Plan 2040. I don't think we have a meeting that goes by that we don't have one of those issues in some way come up. I would bring me back maybe to the county commission. And when we go out beyond the urban growth areas, we do know that the county is working with the city of Eudora to set up growth tiers now too. So I don't know if that's going to happen with Baldwin and with Compton, but that does seem to imply there's going to be pressure on all the unincorporated area outside of the growth tiers, and we also know that there's work on updating subdivision regulations. So where are we with that, and how do you suggest we approach these matters leading up to those actual changes? I'll just leave that open to anyone on the county commission.
Jim, that might be a better question for staff.
All right.
If my commission's all right with that, I would
Sarah
just,
or Tanya or
yeah.
whoever wants to jump in.
Tanya, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Hi, Tanya Voigt, Zoning Director for Douglas County. I think Jeff will also be able to chime in on this issue. We did a work session with the county commissioners about 2 weeks ago, and Chad's presentation was a part of that, and was able to kind of show the discrepancies that we're having with allowing those large lot subdivisions out in the county. And then when the city reaches it, obviously the ability for it to be built out in a high dense development close to a school where there should be high density, close to services where there should be high density development, pretty much gets halted or stopped. And so we've really asked the commission for guidance on, how to move forward. The suggestion was really to look at our subdivision regulations and look at specifically tier 3 in the county, and possibly work on regulations that would only allow development to the rural standards. So it would keep the land open and larger. So 20-acre lots would be the density, 1 residence per 20 acres, unless they apply for a rezone for, say, 2 houses on a 20. So they'd have to go through a process for that. So they would only be able to develop to the standards in tier 3 that are allowed outside of the urban growth area and the unincorporated area. And I think that's really what we're trying to push, is just limiting that development, especially in tier 3, so that when the city is growing, that there's some larger lots and land that can be manipulated and catered to annexation.
If I may add just a bit there, I think everybody's kind of hit on that same mark. Because Plan 2040 was a really good kind of
etch-a-sketch moment, if you will. It really shook up a lot of things that we had in our long-range plans. And it's going to take us a while to get all the plans and codes up to date to kind of meet the expectations we have lined out in there. So it's going to take us a while to get there, but it really, Plan 2040 is like setting a work plan and kind of giving us guidance on what we need to do next. And now it's just a matter of, going and getting those aspects changed to meet those mission and vision statements that we have in our long-range plan.
If I could add a little bit, Planning Commissioner Carpenter mentioned the urban growth area establishment around Eudora. Actually, this is the model that we're using in Eudora. So their version of tier 3 does not allow for development in a manner currently allowed for in the Lawrence tier 3. So this would be a great way to sort of keep that development happening closer to the city and use those standards appropriately. So I appreciate you bringing that up in terms of how we're approaching that. And I would say, well, I appreciate Jeff's comments around, this work time to sort of get all the regulations to where we need to do to be consistent. As you well know, in the meantime, we're receiving applications. This is not stopping. So I would be curious as to, is there any sort of Band-Aid or at least consensus of approach that you would give us when we receive these applications? I think we feel oftentimes we were put in a very difficult position in terms of how we approach some of these issues. And so I don't know if there's any sort of interim strategy that can be developed, because while it'll take months, possibly years to get these plans completed.
Sarah, who are you directing that question to?
Well, I guess I'd be curious. Planning Commission really knows most intimately how the work happens. But I guess I'd also be curious from the city commission, if you believe that this is a consistent approach to how we want to do this, do you have suggestions for the county, both the commission and our staff, in terms of how we should approach these issues as they continue to come to us for subdivisions at 3 acres, outside of tier 3 and inside tier 3?
Let's throw that to the city commissioners. Does anyone want to respond to Sarah's?
I feel like I'm saying too much, so others can jump in there. If others want to, I'll give everyone else a chance first there.
I've also spoken, but I will say, Sarah, that's a big question, and it's a really good question. And I think that it's, not necessarily an off the top of your head response question. And I appreciate you asking it. And it's something that I think we need to seriously consider.
I would just say it appears to me from our votes at the Planning Commission that we're struggling with that tension between what is permitted in the area plan and Plan 2040. And if it is a request to change what's in an area plan or to radically depart from Plan 2040, it seems to be both ways. You're getting unanimous votes to recommend denial right now. So I don't know if that message is getting out to the applicants that this tension exists, and when it comes before our body, that's the consideration we're making, and not to be surprised if you get a recommendation of denial, which throws it to the elected officials to try to wrangle out what to do in this interim period.
If I can jump in here, just
sure.
I would say, yeah, thank you for throwing us those really fun challenges when they're in conflict. But I mean, one of the tools we used earlier when we recognized a problem in the unincorporated area was a moratorium. And I'm not advocating necessarily for a moratorium, but I'm saying when we're talking about, things still happening, and yet we need to get new tools in place in order to get our feet under us. Those, I think, are some of the things that Sarah, I know you all tune into every county commission meeting and watch us on the Zoom recordings, but that was some discussions we had at our growth in the unincorporated area discussion. Is like, is it time to do that? And I think we went back to, as Tanya said, looking at those subdivision regulations rather than doing that. I'm not sure it's time to do that, but I think that's what we're asking is do you have thoughts around that?
Well, I would jump in and add two things. One, I would say this is the beauty of having a joint county and city planning commission. Obviously we have a county commission and city commission that have certain issues, but having I enjoyed that, and I thought it was a very important aspect. And I think as we've seen with Plan 2040 going forward, having a body that's looking at both of those issues, I think is very important. And the other competing value that certainly we're hearing about and is going to keep coming up is affordable housing and the number of houses available. Someone sent me an email yesterday that said there's 29 houses on the MLS, and 16 of those are over $500,000, which means there's 13 houses on the MLS that are under $500,000. And even those houses of over 500,000, you've seen some of those folks say it's easier and cheaper to go out into the county and take 20 acres than it is to find a lot inside of Lawrence to build a house. And so that is some of that pressure. And we're going to have to, struggle with finding places where we can have some new subdivisions, the appropriate places for those subdivisions, so we can have more houses. Now, some of that's within the city, and we want to encourage that. but some of that's probably in tier 2, and where should that be, and how quickly can we get there? Are issues we're going to struggle with as well, especially if we, the more we restrict the county in tier 3, which I'm not opposed to, it's just going to drive more pressure to where can we build? Where can I put a house? I'm ready to build a house. Tell me where I can do it.
Which Major Finkelday, I guess, stresses the point that's been brought up by just about everyone so far, the problematic nature of those large lots surrounding the city in tier 2, because it can prohibit meeting that very goal. So let me throw it back to just the planning commissioners for a moment that have been sitting back to see if anybody has a question or a comment they would like to address to any of the elected bodies or the city manager or the county manager or planning staff. This is great. We have everybody here. So
Commissioner Carpenter, I think Commissioner Larson's trying to jump in here.
All right, Commissioner Larson.
Yeah, Commissioner Larson. I didn't want to overrun you there, Jim.
That's all right.
I guess when we're talking about the need to maybe get in front of the application process versus the area plans not matching up with 2040, I would turn it back to staff to ask what do you need in order to get in front of all of this? I know you've brought to the city commission your list of items that you're working on for the next few years. And it seemed like it was going to take a long time to get through 2040 and get that all the details of 2040 decided. So what do you need in order to start getting in front of some of these issues that we are seeing where plans aren't matching up and 2040 needs to, more details?
Commissioner, I think it's a lot of the sector plans and neighborhood plans were done at a time
when the market was a little low during the Great Depression. So we had staff time and capability to really put in a lot of good effort and cover a lot of ground very quickly there. So in many ways, it's a lot of making staff available to have that opportunity to think long range, take into a lot of that consideration and get that public comment from both inside the city and unincorporated areas around the city to make those happen. So it's a little bit of I would say it's almost of a twofold of an issue there is we have, we got to make the time available for staff to do it, and that could, just be more personnel, but it's also probably looking at our codes and seeing are we getting what we really want out of our codes, or are they asking us to do a lot of things that we want to do, but maybe it doesn't allow us the time to get to the things that we're doing a lot of things that we have to do by code, but we're not getting the time to do a lot of things that we would like to do. So I think it's a two-pronged approach in some respects, truthfully.
So the staff that's being proposed on Tuesday night at the City Commission, this is Commissioner Larson again, I'm sorry, that's being proposed Tuesday night, is that leading to that being able to address some of these issues?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services, that would be the hope. We think that would be a way to kind of allow, kind of freeing up staff to have that opportunity to begin to kind of get out into that long-range planning area, if you will.
Commissioner Larson again. So if the additional staff is brought on board, and you're able to start more targeting some of the work that you do, or as far as the backlog, is there anything else that we can do as a commission to help you to get further down the road more quickly? I mean, do we need to look at the idea of reviewing applications versus working more on getting caught up on our codes as well as the Plan 2040, or what do you see?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Commissioner, I think they're both equally important in many ways. It's just trying to figure out how to get those structures right so that we're getting what we would like to see out of our planning efforts and also our code efforts.
Thank you.
If I may, this is City Manager Craig Owens, and really happy to be here and appreciate all the work that goes in for all these volunteer efforts that go into this. I just want to add something, and actually Jeff and I have a meeting this afternoon to talk about some of this. So Jeff, this is a preview, but what I've pledged, and you see in the strategic planning process, is we need to offer options that are one step above your comfort level. And I don't think that we've been doing that. And so there is price tags attached to it. There are trading off priorities that are attached to that. But my plan and hope is that we're going to offer you some options that take us faster in these areas. Because in my 19 months here, I've heard a lot about these needs that continue to follow us and that continue to complicate the work that's done on a day-to-day, and don't let us go to the place that we'd like to go. So I'm going to show you what faster looks like. And I think that's our obligation, and show you those options. Now, whether we decide that that's what we want to do, that's a different story. But, you know, I haven't heard Jeff say, well, we could outsource this and bring a consultant in and do a lot of these heavy lifts, instead of it being the staff squeezing this work in between everything else. And I think that's the type of thing that we should be bringing as options to the commission, to the planning commission, and certainly the county commission consider those as well, since we're in the joint. We do the work jointly. But I would just offer that too, and we're going to prepare to think a little bit bigger and faster. And if that's what we want to do, then we can make those decisions together.
Okay, any follow-up from Commissioner Larson or Jeff? Okay. All right, we have, about 14 minutes left. Commissioner Shanklin had his hand up for my question before we went down this great avenue. And I have to apologize for missing Commissioner Larson's hand. You know, when you're doing this, you got 25 screens open in front of you. It's easy to miss somebody that's over in a corner. So, Commissioner Shanklin.
Thank you. Hi, this is Greg Shanklin, Planning Commissioner. It seems to me that there's a corollary to the applications for large lot development at the periphery, which is to immediately provide supply opportunities within the city of Lawrence. And the techniques to do that, I don't know if we've tried this. I haven't been on the Planning Commission long enough to see what the activity has been in this area. But density is a way to provide those supply opportunities. And they would hopefully relieve some of the pressure at the periphery. Is that something we're looking at?
Is that addressed to anyone in particular?
That is just an open question.
An open question.
Wants to answer it. I was thinking either Mr. Owens or anyone of the city commissioners might be a person to speak to that.
Is the question? Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor.
You can answer too, Craig. I was just going to say, yes, I think Plan 2040 says density. And to Jeff's point, and the point I was making earlier, which is, but our code doesn't necessarily make density any easier today than it did before we had Plan 2040. And so the question is, can we get our code to match our desires? But certainly the plan says we want more density, but we need a code that enforces that. Craig, sorry to cut you off there.
No, that's okay. I mean, I feel like the sophistication of this audience, some of this is stating maybe the obvious, but there's also market realities that come into it. So, you know, are there real opportunities to do that? And is the private sector bringing, investing that direction? And so, I think we need to be very attuned to that reality as a part of the equation, not pander to it, but to definitely make sure that those kinds of redevelopment or infill development opportunities have viability economically and are not in competition, with where we would prefer not to see development.
Commissioner Bowling.
Thank you. I feel very fortunate to be in this company today. Thank you, everyone. I want to just follow up on what Craig just said. I was over on Beatnik Lane yesterday looking at that redevelopment. And I've talked to Tim Keller, and I'd like to just draw a line between what Commissioner Reed said and Mayor Finkeldijk. We need to be doing infill development for environmental sustainability purposes. But we also have to be looking at, is it financially viable to do to do infill development? And I'm concerned about that. So, I think that we need to be looking at not just what are we doing on the periphery, but how are we handling the efforts, the developers who are actually doing what we're encouraging them to do. How are we handling that? And what are the barriers that they're facing? So, I mean, this is very important.
It just brings up the point. Every time there's an open discussion, we bring up so many incredible issues that are worthy of a whole day or two on their own. So I hope that we could have additional meetings that could bring everyone together to thrash out these ideas that have this intersection between the city and the county. Commissioner Willie, I saw you had your hand up earlier.
I did, thank you. Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. I wanted to address Commissioner Larson's point about what do we do next and where do we go from here about the area plans. And I know there's a staff capacity issue, but I know when the Planning Commission met not that long ago with the Multimodal Transportation Commission, and both of us agreed that there was interest in forming a steering committees to look at area plans that would require community time that I think that there's interest and effort to put into some amount of staff time, but it would get the ball rolling and we would understand better the scope of the work. So if that needed to be outsourced or if that needed to be staff hours allocated towards that, we would have a better idea of how far off are these plans, how much time is it going to take to bring them into compliance. But I think starting with a steering committee to tackle those and neighborhood plans being something separate, but these area plans are keeping us from being able to move forward with our work. We're turning down projects because they don't meet those plans because we haven't had that discussion, and projects that could very well be helpful for the city. So that would be my next step.
Looking at Commissioner Shipley, you're the only city commissioner we haven't heard from. So do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'm glad Commissioner Willie brought that up. I really enjoyed that you guys met with multimodal and had a discussion. I'm trying not to use buzzwords, but intersectionality, I guess, as Commissioner Onada had brought up earlier. What seemed to be a kind of a conversation between the two of you is the way that your areas meet and yet you don't. So I was very glad to see you both together. One thing I find interesting is that, a development might have a traffic study and you see it, but they don't. So those are some interesting things. And I was very excited to see you guys getting together and thinking about that. And I certainly know that when we were talking about our strategic plan, we're talking more about focusing in on those things that have been siloed and not able to meet with each other and think more holistically about what the repercussions are of those decisions. So I'm just excited to see that. Another thing I thought was kind of interesting that happened over the last year that I've been watching you guys, maybe apropos of nothing, was it seemed like a couple times you felt constrained by financial issues. You felt like you were presented with a particular scenario and that you couldn't, bless you, you couldn't look outside that or give us your ideal opinion outside of financial constraints. So I don't know that I can put that on you, perhaps more on staff and the way that they present items to you. But sometimes I felt like I just, bless you, want to know what your ideal opinion is, unconstrained by financial issues. That's happened a couple times. So maybe not the direction of your conversation, but in terms of your feedback of watching you guys and just wanting to know your purest and most expertise opinion, which again, I'm a huge fan. You guys are easily the most experienced and informed of our boards, and we should be very proud of all of the work that you do for free, as qualified as many of you are, very educated in these issues, and you give us your expertise out of the kindness of your heart, which I absolutely appreciate.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Chair Carter, I saw that you had your hand up. We only
Yes,
have a
thank-
couple of minutes left. So.
I will keep it just as brief as I can. David Carter, Planning Commissioner. I wanted to return to one of the things I said earlier about history. And it goes back to this urban-rural fringe and the information that we need as commissioners to help elected officials and policymakers make decisions that will serve the future community. And this goes back to something I've talked with Jeff about, this a desire to be able to study the city as it exists and to look at specific, parts of the city as manifestations of past policy decisions. Because every one of the decisions that are made today will have a consequence on the future community. And so we had a really helpvolt brief snapshot of the presentation. I think that Mayor Finkeldine talked about from Chad Voigt, talking about the impact of planning decisions on the provision of physical infrastructure and how that can aid or interfere with a healthy development, healthy future development of the city. So one of the things I think that would be really helpful to planning commissioners who are, we even if we're here for 2 terms, 6 years, it's barely enough time to develop kind of the historical perspective that we need to help elected officials make good decisions. So to be able to understand kind of the life cycle of development, how one type of land use decision can, in this kind of decision tree, can lead to different types of possibilities in the future, either assisting or cutting off the healthy development of the community, would be something that would be really, really helpful. So I hope I've tried to jam a lot of thoughts into a short comment, but understanding life cycle from a policy perspective would be super helpful.
Thank you, Chair Carter. I think, as you can see, the planning commissioners, I think down to every individual, is hungry for more information so we can make better decisions. So it doesn't mean we always want to have 1,000-page packets for every month, but the better the information, including the historical perspective and the current and future goals of the city and county, is always helpful in our discussions, and I think can only benefit you and us teasing out issues and making recommendations to you before you go through your public hearing on the same issue. It's kind of your sneak preview of what's coming at you on many occasions, including sometimes the anger and ire of the local residents. But thank you, everybody, for being here today. And in our last 2 minutes, I'm going to turn it back over to Vice Chair Sinclair to wrap up our session for today.
Thank you, Jim. Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. Thank you. I'd like to echo Jim's appreciation for all of you joining. Thank you, County and City Commissioners, City Manager Owens, County Administrator Plinsky, and Tanya, Zoning Director. We really appreciate you guys joining, and I think this has been a very valuable conversation, albeit short. Hopefully, will help move things down the road and make some progress. Thank you also, Jeff, Becky, Denny, Kyle from the Planning Department, and Kurt for working the Zoom call. I think it's been a helpful meeting, and hopefully it will help in the future as we embark on more of these communications. But I think with that, Becky, unless you have anything, or Jeff, that should be a wrap.
Commissioner Sinclair, that we have nothing additional to add. We'd like
to thank everyone for joining us today and taking an hour out of your Friday to spend with us, and for the planning commissioners to spend most of your morning with us. So from all of us here at City Hall, thank you and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.